He was declared dead by his own government, buried alive in a Montana blizzard by the very people he swore to protect, and the only souls on Earth who could save him were a determined FBI agent and her German shepherd. But what they uncovered in that frozen forest didn't just save one man's life. It blew open the darkest conspiracy in American military history. This is the story they tried to erase. And you need to hear every single word of it. If you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show them some love, because this story is dedicated to every family who raised a warrior and every warrior who was betrayed by the people they trusted most. Special Agent Danielle Carter had been with the FBI for 11 years, and in those 11 years, she had seen things that would make most people lose sleep for the rest of their lives. She had worked organized crime cases in Chicago that led her into underground bunkers filled with weapons that could arm a small nation. She had infiltrated domestic terror cells in Texas, where the members genuinely believed they were doing God's work by planning mass casualties. She had sat across interrogation tables from men with dead eyes who confessed to crimes that defied human understanding. But through all of it, through every dark corridor she had walked and every nightmare she had processed alone in her apartment at 3 a.m, Danielle Carter had maintained something that most agents eventually lost. She still believed that the work mattered. She still believed that finding the truth, no matter how buried, no matter how dangerous, was worth the cost. On the morning of December 14th, the temperature in Glacier County, Montana had dropped to -17 degrees Fahrenheit before the sun had even considered rising. Danielle had been stationed out of the Kalispell field office for 3 weeks, working what her supervisor described as a routine missing persons case. A man named Thomas Reeves had vanished from his home 12 days earlier. His wife had reported him missing. Neighbors had seen nothing unusual. The local sheriff had worked the case for a week before the FBI was called in, though nobody had given Danielle a clear reason why a missing husband in rural Montana required federal involvement. She had asked twice and received paperwork both times. Danielle had learned over the years that when the paperwork was too clean and too fast, something dirty was usually hiding underneath it. Her partner on this assignment was not a human being. His name was Rex, and he was a 4-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat so thick and well-maintained that it practically gleamed even in the gray morning light. Rex had been her partner for 2 years, and in those 2 years he had located 11 missing persons, detected narcotics in 17 separate cases, and once tracked a fleeing suspect for 6 miles through downtown Seattle without losing the scent for a single moment. Rex was not simply a trained animal. He was her most trusted colleague, more reliable than any human partner she had ever worked with, more perceptive, more honest, and incapable of the kind of political maneuvering that made federal law enforcement a minefield for anyone who actually cared about justice. Danielle had requested to search the Whitefish Mountain Forest Preserve based on a single piece of information she had extracted from a gas station receipt found in Thomas Reeves's truck. The receipt was time-stamped 4 days before his disappearance and placed him at a gas station 16 miles northeast of his home, in the exact direction of the forest preserve. Nobody else had flagged this receipt. Nobody else had thought it was worth pursuing. Danielle had flagged it because in 11 years she had learned that the only people who drive 16 miles in the opposite direction of their workplace at 11:30 at night are either running toward something or running away from something. Either way, the forest was where the answer was. She parked her vehicle on the service road at 6:40 in the morning, clipped Rex's tracking harness, and gave him the scent article she had been authorized to use. It was a jacket belonging to Thomas Reeves, unwashed, sealed in an evidence bag. Rex put his nose to it for 4 seconds, lifted his head, and began moving northeast into the tree line without hesitation or confusion. Danielle followed him into the forest with her hand on her sidearm and her body camera recording. For the first 40 minutes, the search was quiet. The snow was deep and the wind was cutting, and Danielle pulled her face gaiter up over her nose and focused on keeping pace with Rex while monitoring her GPS tracker. The forest was dense with lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, the branches above her head heavy with snow that occasionally released and fell in cold curtains around her boots. The visibility was perhaps 60 feet in any direction. The storm that had been forecast for the previous night had arrived slightly late, and it was arriving now with full commitment, the kind of blizzard that erases landmarks and makes the world feel like a small white room with no exits. Rex stopped at the 52-minute mark. Danielle had learned to read his body language the way a musician reads sheet music. Every shift in his posture, every change in the angle of his ears, every variation in the speed of his breathing told her something specific and reliable. When Rex stopped and his entire body went rigid, his nose dropping to within an inch of the snow surface, his tail straight and still, it meant he had found something significant beneath the surface. Not nearby. Not approaching. Beneath. Directly beneath where he was standing. Danielle moved to him immediately, knelt beside him, and placed her gloved hand on the snow. She pressed down slowly and felt resistance almost immediately. Not the hard resistance of frozen earth. A different resistance. The resistance of something compressed. Something that had been packed down deliberately. Rex began to dig. His front paws moved with precise, practiced urgency, throwing snow backward in rapid arcing motions, and Danielle joined him with her hands, scooping snow away from the area his nose kept returning to. They worked together for 90 seconds. And then Danielle's fingers touched fabric. She pulled her hand back instinctively and then forced herself to keep going, pulling the fabric upward, brushing snow away from it, revealing more and more of it until the shape beneath became unmistakable. It was a shoulder. A human shoulder, broad and muscular beneath a torn camouflage jacket. Danielle swept snow away from the shoulder and moved upward toward where the neck would be, and then where the face would be, and she uncovered a face that was so still and so pale and so lacerated with dried blood that her first thought, for approximately 3 seconds, was that she had found a body. Then the eyelids moved. Danielle pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck and found a pulse. It was slow, dangerously slow, but it was there. She grabbed her radio with her other hand and called it in immediately, giving her GPS coordinates and requesting emergency medical response, then immediately began working to free the man from the snow, digging around his torso, understanding that hypothermia at this level required her to get him out of direct contact with the frozen ground as quickly as possible. The man's mouth was bound with black tactical tape. His face was covered in wounds that were not fresh, meaning he had been down here for at least 24 hours in these conditions. His clothing was military issue, heavily worn and partially destroyed, the kind of damage that came not from neglect but from extreme physical trauma. His hands, when she freed them, were blue at the fingertips. She pulled the tape from his mouth as carefully as she could, and he drew a breath so deep and so raw that it sounded less like breathing and more like someone surfacing from underwater after being held down far too long. His eyes opened fully for the first time and focused on her face with an expression she had seen before on survivors of extreme situations. It was not relief. It was not gratitude. It was calculation. Even in this condition, even at the edge of death, this man was assessing the situation. He was looking at her FBI vest. He was looking at Rex. He was looking at the tree line behind her. He was processing threat levels before he had said a single word. That told Danielle everything she needed to know about who this man was before he said anything at all. His name, as she would learn in the next 4 minutes while waiting for medical backup, was Marcus Cole. Commander Marcus Cole, United States Navy SEAL, Team 6. And according to every official record in the United States government database, Marcus Cole had been killed in action 8 months ago during a classified operation in Eastern Europe. There had been a funeral. There had been a flag presented to his wife, Elena, at a ceremony in Virginia Beach. There was a grave with his name on it in a military cemetery outside of Norfolk. But Marcus Cole was not dead. He was buried in a Montana forest with his hands bound, his face beaten, and a story inside him that was going to bring down people in positions of power that Danielle Carter had never imagined she would ever have reason to investigate. The medical team arrived 19 minutes after her call. In those 19 minutes, Danielle had managed to get Marcus partially upright and had wrapped her own thermal layer around his shoulders, keeping Rex pressed against his left side for body heat. Marcus had spoken only in fragments during that time, his voice barely above a whisper, cracked and raw from dehydration and cold. He had told her his name. He had told her he was Navy. He had told her that the people who buried him were not strangers. And then he had said the 4 words that changed everything. "It was your director." Danielle had not responded immediately. She was not the kind of person who reacted without thinking, and this was precisely the kind of statement that required every ounce of disciplined thinking she possessed. She had asked him to clarify, and he had looked at her with those calculating eyes and said it again, slowly and clearly, as if he understood that she needed to hear it more than once to accept it. FBI Director Ronald Ashcraft had ordered Marcus Cole buried alive in a Montana blizzard. Not metaphorically. Literally. And Marcus Cole could prove it. The weeks that followed were the most dangerous of Danielle Carter's career and quite possibly her life. She made the decision in the ambulance, while Marcus was being stabilized and while her radio was in her hand and the frequency to her supervisor was one button away, that she was not going to report what Marcus had told her through official channels. Not yet. Not until she understood what she was dealing with. Because if Marcus was telling the truth, and every instinct she had developed over 11 years of reading human beings told her that he was, then official channels were exactly where information went to disappear. She contacted instead the one person she trusted absolutely. Her former mentor, retired FBI Special Agent Patricia Monroe, who had left the Bureau 8 years ago after 30 years of service and now lived on a small farm in Western Virginia and bred German Shepherds as a hobby. Patricia was 71 years old, brilliant, completely off the grid by choice, and owed favors to people in places that Danielle did not fully understand but had always appreciated. Patricia listened to everything Danielle told her over an encrypted phone line, asked 4 precise questions, and then said simply, "Don't go back to the office. Drive south. I'll make some calls." Marcus Cole, once he was medically stable enough to speak at length, told his story in full. And it was a story that had begun not 8 months ago with his supposed death, but 3 years ago with a discovery he had made during a routine intelligence debrief following a mission in Ukraine. The mission itself had been standard. Extraction of a high-value asset, a Ukrainian intelligence officer who had been compromised and needed to get out before the wrong people caught up with him. Marcus and his team had executed the extraction cleanly. But during the 48-hour holding period before transport, Marcus had been present for a conversation he was not supposed to hear between the asset and a man who had arrived at the safe house unannounced and unscheduled. Marcus had recognized the man from a briefing photograph he had seen 2 years earlier. The man's name was Victor Calloway, and he was a private defense contractor who had been blacklisted by the Department of Defense in 2018 following an investigation into illegal weapons transfers in the Middle East. An investigation that had been quietly closed with no charges filed and no public explanation. Victor Calloway was in that Ukrainian safe house having a very specific conversation with the asset about a weapons pipeline that was not moving weapons into conflict zones for profit. It was moving weapons to American soil. Specifically, to domestic militia groups that had been carefully selected and cultivated over the previous 4 years. The conversation included logistics, timelines, funding sources, and the name of the American official who was providing cover for the entire operation at the federal level. That name was Ronald Ashcraft. Marcus had recorded the conversation on a personal device he was not supposed to have with him, because Marcus Cole was the kind of man who had learned early in his career that the difference between a witness and a casualty was often nothing more than a recording. He had secured the recording, completed the mission, returned to the United States, and spent 3 months trying to figure out who he could trust with what he had. He had gone through 4 different channels in that time, each one more carefully selected than the last. Each one had resulted in the same outcome. Within 2 weeks of being approached, each contact had either been reassigned to a location that made follow-up impossible, or had gone silent without explanation. Marcus had finally made contact with a senator from Montana named David Hargrove, a man with a long record of serious oversight work and a reputation for being genuinely difficult to intimidate. Senator Hargrove had agreed to meet. The meeting had been set for a Monday morning in Washington. On the Friday before that meeting, Marcus Cole had been officially declared killed in action during a mission that his own teammates would later quietly confirm had never actually taken place. Except Marcus had not been killed. He had been taken. 3 men had come for him at his home in Virginia Beach on a Thursday night. 2 days before his team was told he had died in Eastern Europe. They had been professional, efficient, and careful. They had used a sedative that left no marks and produced no memories. He had woken up in a location he did not immediately recognize, restrained, and had spent the next several months in a facility he eventually identified as being somewhere in northern Montana based on the climate, the tree species visible through a small window, and the direction and duration of what felt like a long drive during a transport he had partially remained conscious for. He had escaped 6 days before Danielle found him. He had survived on nothing but creek water and 2 protein bars he had found in the jacket of a guard he had overpowered during the escape. He had been moving through the forest trying to reach a road when the temperature dropped below survivable levels and the blizzard closed in, and he had made the decision to dig himself into the snow as an emergency insulation measure. It was a technique he had learned in SEER training. Survive, evade, resist, escape. He had dug himself in expecting to wait out the worst of the storm for a few hours. He had lost consciousness somewhere in the second hour and had not expected to regain it. Rex had found him with 4 hours to spare. The recording Marcus had made in that Ukrainian safe house still existed. He had not been carrying it when he was taken, because he had never been naive enough to keep his only copy in an easily accessible location. He had encrypted it and stored it in 3 separate places using a system he had designed himself, a system that required his own biometric confirmation to access, meaning that even knowing the storage locations was useless without Marcus Cole alive to open them. This was why he was alive. They had not buried him to kill him immediately. They had buried him as a message and as a method of extracting information. The facility he had been held in for months had been an attempt to break him down slowly enough that he would eventually give up the locations voluntarily. When that had failed and he had escaped, the burial had been a last resort, a way of removing him from circulation while they regrouped and planned a more permanent solution. They had expected to come back for him within 48 hours. They had not expected a German shepherd to find him in a blizzard. Danielle spent the next 3 weeks working completely outside official channels, which was the most professionally dangerous thing she had ever done, and also, she was increasingly certain, the only thing keeping her alive. Patricia Monroe's network turned out to be something Danielle had not fully appreciated until she was inside it, a quiet constellation of retired intelligence professionals, former federal judges, investigative journalists with serious credentials, and 2 sitting members of Congress who had been waiting for years for exactly this kind of evidence to surface, through exactly this kind of credible source. The recording was accessed in a series of 3 separate sessions, each in a different location, each with a different set of verified witnesses present. The audio was clear. The identifications were unambiguous. Victor Calloway's voice matched existing recordings on file. The name Ronald Ashcraft was spoken 11 times in the recording, with specific references to federal budget authorizations that could be cross-referenced with actual appropriations records, and with personal knowledge of classified FBI operations that only someone at the director level would possess. But the story did not end with the recording. Because while Danielle was building the case, the people on the other side of it were not idle. She became aware that she was being monitored when Rex began alerting to an unfamiliar scent near the vehicle she had been using, a behavior he displayed only when he detected surveillance equipment. A sweep of the vehicle confirmed a tracking device that had been placed beneath the rear wheel well. Danielle removed it, placed it on a bus heading to Seattle, and moved Marcus and herself to a location that Patricia had arranged in Western Virginia. 2 days later, Danielle's supervisor called her personal cell phone and told her, in a carefully neutral tone, that she was being placed on administrative leave pending a review of her conduct during the Montana assignment. He did not specify what conduct. He did not need to. Danielle thanked him politely, ended the call, and began the next phase of what she had already decided was no longer an investigation. It was a disclosure. Senator David Hargrove, the same senator that Marcus had originally intended to meet before his staged death, received a package through a courier system that Patricia Monroe had arranged. The package contained a full written brief, the authenticated recording with chain of custody documentation, medical records documenting Marcus's condition at the time of rescue, and a 17-page analysis prepared by 2 former intelligence officials in Patricia's network that laid out the weapons pipeline in operational detail, naming 6 domestic militia groups for shell companies, and 3 additional federal officials who appeared in the financial records as recipients of funds routed through Victor Callaway's contracting network. Senator Hargrove was not a man who required time to decide whether to act on something like this. He had been in the Senate for 22 years, and he had been waiting for a moment exactly like this one, not because he was cynical or because he had known it was coming, but because he was the kind of public servant who understood that the hardest moments in a democracy are not the ones that arrive with fanfare and obvious urgency. They are the ones that arrive quietly, wrapped in danger and doubt, requiring someone to stand up before the outcome is certain. He stood up. The sealed federal complaint was filed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Director Ronald Ashcraft had been placed on administrative leave by the Deputy Attorney General. By Wednesday morning, federal agents who had been selected specifically from field offices with no connection to Ashcraft's network arrived at Victor Callaway's residence in McLean, Virginia, with a warrant. Callaway was not there. He had crossed into Canada the previous evening using a passport that had been issued under a different name, a detail that would become one of the most damaging pieces of additional evidence in the case, since the issuance of that passport required authorization that traced directly back to Ashcraft's office. The arrest of Ronald Ashcraft occurred on a Thursday morning, 10 days after the complaint was filed, at his home in Bethesda, Maryland. It was not a dramatic arrest in the visual sense. There were no cameras present, no perp walk, no moment of theatrical justice. It was 4 federal agents, a warrant, and a man in a bathrobe who looked, according to one of the agents present, not like a man who was surprised but like a man who had been waiting for a knock that he had hoped would never come. Marcus Cole testified before a closed session of the Senate Intelligence Committee 6 weeks after Danielle Carter pulled him out of the snow. He walked into that hearing room on his own 2 feet, in his dress uniform, with every medal he had ever earned on his chest, and the composure of a man who had survived things that most people cannot imagine and had come out the other side not broken but clarified. He testified for 7 hours. The transcript of that testimony, when it was eventually partially declassified, was described by 3 separate national security journalists as the most significant single account of domestic corruption at the federal level in the post-9/11 era. Danielle Carter received a formal letter of reprimand from the FBI for conducting an unauthorized investigation outside official channels. She also received, in the same week, a personal phone call from the deputy director of the FBI, who had been appointed to lead the bureau in the interim period following Ashcraft's removal. The deputy director told her, off the record, that the letter of reprimand was a procedural necessity that would have no impact on her career trajectory, and that what she had done in Montana and in the weeks following was the kind of work that the Bureau existed to do and too rarely achieved. He asked her what assignment she wanted next. She told him she wanted to go back to Kalispell. She had not finished her original missing persons case. Thomas Reeves, the man she had originally gone to Montana to find, was located 5 days later. He was alive, hiding in a hunting cabin 23 miles northeast of his home. He had discovered, entirely by accident, that his property backed up against a parcel of land being used as a temporary weapons storage site by one of the militia groups in Victor Callaway's network. He had taken photographs. He had been running ever since. His wife had not filed a missing persons report. She had filed a safety complaint that had been routed by someone inside the system into a missing persons case specifically to ensure that a federal agent was assigned to find him before he could reach anyone willing to listen. That federal agent was supposed to find him and bring him back into a system controlled by people who would ensure his silence. That federal agent had instead brought Rex. And Rex, as he had demonstrated in 11 previous cases and would demonstrate in many cases to come, had found exactly what needed to be found, in exactly the place where hope seemed least justified, and had changed the course of everything by doing the thing he was built and trained and purposed to do. He had followed the truth wherever it led, and he had not stopped until he found it. In the months following the initial arrests, the case expanded in ways that surprised even the most experienced investigators involved in it. 4 more federal officials were indicted. 2 of the 6 militia groups were dismantled through coordinated law enforcement operations across 3 states. Victor Callaway was apprehended in British Columbia by Canadian authorities and extradited to the United States 4 months after his initial flight, looking considerably less composed than he had in the corporate headshots that had accompanied his defense contracting career. The weapons that had been stockpiled for domestic distribution were recovered in 11 separate caches across Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and eastern Washington. The sheer volume of what was recovered prompted a classified briefing for members of both the Senate and House Armed Services Committees, and the contents of that briefing, judging by the expressions of the members entering and leaving the secure facility where it was held, appeared to be considerably more disturbing than even the most informed observers had anticipated. Elena Cole, Marcus's wife, who had spent 8 months grieving a husband whose grave she had visited 11 times, learned that her husband was alive through a phone call that she would later describe in an interview as the most disorienting and beautiful moment of her life. She had answered the phone expecting a call from her sister. She had heard Marcus's voice say her name. She had sat down on her kitchen floor and stayed there for 20 minutes before she was able to speak. Marcus took a medical leave from active duty and spent 4 months in Virginia with Elena before returning to a role that was not combat deployment but advisory, working with a newly established joint task force designed to build the kind of oversight infrastructure that might prevent the systemic compromise that had allowed Ashcraft's network to operate undetected for as long as it had. He was not bitter about the months he had lost. He was, by multiple accounts, focused entirely on the work that remained, because Marcus Cole was the kind of man who understood that the mission did not end when the immediate crisis was resolved. The mission was the long game. It was always the long game. Danielle Carter and Rex remained partners for 3 more years, during which time they worked cases in 7 different states and were responsible, directly or as supporting investigators, for the resolution of 34 significant federal cases. Rex retired from active service at the age of 7, which is considered a full and distinguished career for a working dog of his kind, and Danielle took him home. Not to a kennel, not to a retirement facility, but home, to the apartment in Kalispell that she had rented during those initial 3 weeks in Montana and had never quite gotten around to leaving. On the evening of Rex's official retirement, Danielle sat on her porch with Rex beside her, both of them looking out at the same mountain range that had been visible on the horizon during the morning she had parked on that service road and walked into the forest, not knowing what she was looking for. She thought about the specific quality of the silence in a forest during a blizzard, and how it is a silence that feels total and final, and how that morning Rex had walked directly into that silence and refused to accept its implications. She thought about Marcus's eyes in the moment they had focused on her, calculating even then, survival instinct overriding everything else. She thought about Thomas Reeves in his hunting cabin, terrified and alone, and still holding onto his photographs because he could not bring himself to let go of the truth he had stumbled into. She thought about Elena Cole on her kitchen floor. She thought about how many times in her career she had been told, in various ways and with various degrees of directness, that the system was bigger than any individual effort to correct it. That the right channels existed for a reason, and that departing from them, no matter the justification, was dangerous and presumptuous and ultimately futile. She had heard this so many times from so many people she respected that there had been moments over the years when she had almost believed it. She was very glad she had not. Rex shifted his head onto her knee and exhaled slowly through his nose, that particular exhale that she had learned to read as contentment, as the animal version of a deep breath taken freely, without urgency and without fear. She put her hand on his head, and they sat there together while the sun went down behind the mountains and the Montana sky turned the specific shade of deep blue that had no name in any language she knew but that she had come to associate with the feeling of a case closed and a truth delivered, and a piece of the world quietly, incrementally set more right than it had been before. That was enough. That had always been enough. And somewhere in Virginia Beach, in a house where a flag had once been folded and handed over with condolences that turned out to be premature, Marcus Cole was sitting at a dinner table with his wife, passing the bread, asking about her day, laughing at something she said, alive in the specific and irreplaceable way that only people who have come very close to not being alive can fully appreciate. Alive in a way that understood its own value. Alive in a way that owed a debt to a German shepherd and a stubborn FBI agent who had walked into a blizzard on a December morning following nothing but a gas station receipt and an instinct honed by 11 years of refusing to look away from the truth. The work continues. It always continues. And so do the people willing to do it. Now tell us in the comments below, what part of the country are you watching from? Drop your state, your city, your town. We want to hear from every corner of America because stories like this one belong to all of us. Let us know where you are.